Welcome to the Outtake Show, the film podcast where we give outlandish opinions within the movie and TV world. Today, we're blessed with a special edition of our series, Behind the Lens, where we sit back and talk to a bunch of different creatives within the film industry. Today, we're joined by Sarah Friedland, a up-and-coming director that has a feature debut, Familiar Touch, a story that follows an elderly woman that heads to a care home for the very first time because she's been diagnosed with dementia. Now, this story is very touching, very sad, but very uplifting as well. I enjoyed this film quite a lot, and I had a great conversation with Sarah as she broke down the film bit by bit. I like the fact that she mentioned this to be a coming of age film, which she termed the phrase is a coming of old, where this person is now entering a new chapter of their life. And I think that was beautifully done. So sit back, relax, and enjoy our conversation. And if you have seen the film, be sure to comment down below your thoughts on it. And if you haven't, be sure to check it out right now. It's out in cinemas right now, Familiar Touch. Enjoy our interview with Sarah.
Familiar Touch, such a beautiful, beautiful film that really touched my heart. Um, while watching it, all I was thinking about is just my mother, and I can imagine that's kind of the aim you had when you came to create this film. I understand this is your debut film, so I would love to understand like why you chose this to be your first feature.
Yeah. Well, I love that you were thinking about your mother. It's interesting. It's been one of the best parts of the process is hearing who Ruth has evoked for people. And for
Mm,
some it's mother, grandmother, or I think some of my favorite responses has have been really young people
yeah,
seeing themselves in her, which has been really beautiful to see. It was a long road to making this debut. It took almost a decade.
mm,
Perhaps unsurprisingly, the initial inspiration was my own grandmother.
yeah,
She was a poetry editor and an intellectual and someone who was absolutely ferocious. She couldn't have been further from our tropes and stereotypes of what a little old lady is.
yeah,
And it was in part that kind of gap between her agency and aliveness and the stories that we tell about older women that made me want to make a film that's a character study of an older woman transitioning into needing more care and kind of going through the transition of uh, being seen as an older adult by those around her.
yeah. I remember seeing in past interviews that you called it coming of old, which is something that you should definitely try to trademark because I think that can definitely do numbers going forward. But we'd like to just expand on that term and how you kind of saw this film in that type of way.
Yeah, yeah. I came up with the idea of calling it a coming of old age film while I was working as a caregiver. I worked for other filmmakers for a number of years, doing every entry level job you can do. I did every kind of PA and assistant job there is, basically. And then after that, I started working. I felt like I wanted to learn about people outside of the film industry. So my day job for a number of years, about 3.5 years, was as a caregiver to New York City artists with dementia. And
Oh,
what I noticed was with the clients that I cared for, that the people around them, the world around them, perceived them as the protagonist of a tragedy, but
mm,
the person themselves was more connected to the parts of who they were that continued, that persisted.
mm,
Um, their dementia, their memory loss, the fact of them getting older wasn't the single most important thing that created their identity.
mm,
And so I started thinking about the coming of age film as a genre that for when it's for younger adults, we see a character go through losses, go through struggles, transitions, and we don't say that that person has lost themselves or they withered away. We say they've come of age. And so, and with older adults, one of the ways in which ageism shows up in our culture is as soon as they need any kind of care, we diminish them and we say that they're kind of fading away.
yeah.
Um, and so I wanted sort of as a young person myself to intervene by kind of co-opting the coming of age genre to tell the story of an older woman and seeing her need for care as a transition rather than a loss of self.
Nice. Yeah, you definitely feel that while watching. Also, it's funny you mentioned that you've worked as a caregiver. Like the caregivers in this film, I love how they were kind of represented. Like we had a lot of them kind of working with her, the fact that she has dementia. We do know on one of them that was working side by side with her was also a student. How important was to add these type of themes when it came to characterizing these caregivers?
So important. I mean, I think care work is the most important work there is. It's the work that literally makes life possible. And yet it is deeply undervalued, undercompensated, and underprotected. At least that's the case in the US. I don't know as much about the context in the UK,
Yeah,
but I imagine it's
definitely
similar.
similar, quite similar. Yeah.
And it's there's so many different factors that lead to that undervaluing, but I think part of it is because we undervalue older adults and
Mm.
therefore um, don't care for and support the labor that supports older adults.
Yeah.
And so as much as I knew that the film was going to be a character study of Ruth, I wanted it at the same time to honor the work of care workers and to show the kind of nuances of their labor. Because I think oftentimes when we see caregiving on screen, it's kind of more in a one flew over the cuckoo's nest kind of way,
Mm.
where like the caregivers are abusive.
Yeah.
And I don't want to suggest that that doesn't exist. There, obviously, the caregiving setting in the film is a very privileged one, where there's it's a better workplace and it's a better place to
Yeah.
be cared for. That said, most of the care workers I've met feel called to this work in some way. They are deeply, deeply skilled, and are not appreciated or compensated in the way that they should be. So while it needed to be Ruth's perspective that kind of structured the film, I wanted to find ways to honor caregivers at the same time, both paid care workers and also family caregivers. I wanted both Steve and Vanessa and Brian, all of their perspectives to be kind of woven into their relationship with Ruth.
Nice. Just speaking of the character itself, of course, Steve is a very recognizable voice. When I was hearing it, I was like, wait, I feel like I know this person. That I had to do little,
Yeah.
I'm like, oh wait, it's Mr. Bosberger himself. I was like,
Ah.
okay, very iconic voice there. Just explain to me how it was casting the character for Steve and of course for Ruth as well.
Yeah, I mean, I worked with an amazing casting director named Betsy Fippinger, and this was my first time working with professional actors. So her insight and craft was so crucial to bringing this cast together. The credit for the idea of H. John Benjamin, though, has to go to our producer Alexandra Beyer, who's a huge Bob's Burgers fan, and
Nice.
threw his name in the mix. And as soon as she said it, Betsy and I, our casting director, were like, "Yes, it has to be him." And John and I met up and we talked a bit about the character. And one of the things that really struck me is he said that as a comedian, his job is to court discomfort.
Mm.
And that therefore he felt equipped to do the opening sequence. And that was one of my kind of big worries going into casting the son is, could I find an actor who would really kind of go there in the discomfort. I don't want to spoil the film for anyone who hasn't seen it, but the opening scene has touches on some Oedipal taboos,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
and his relationship to discomfort is part of what made me want him to do it.
yeah.
Um, Kathleen Chalfant, who plays Ruth, I'd been a huge fan of hers for years. It took so long to make this film, though, that when we first started casting, she was too young for the role.
Oh,
Um, so it took some time for us to find each other,
yeah,
and we met and it just kind of clicked, and I knew it had to be her. And then Carolyn Michelle, who plays Vanessa,
yeah.
the primary care worker that we see with Ruth. She and I had been friends for years, and we met on the set of a Steve McQueen HBO show about a decade ago.
Nice.
And watching her, that unfortunately that show um, never went to series, but watching her rehearse with Steve and watching her act in that pilot, I felt like I got to write something to work together one day.
Yeah.
Uh, so she and I had been in touch for a long time, and Andy McQueen, who plays Brian, had blown away our casting director in an audition for something else years before, and she had been sort of waiting for the right role. So it was kind of this,
Yeah,
with
everything
casting,
kind
it's
of fell in
always,
line. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Um, this you said it took like around 10 years, a decade to bring this together. Of course, you mentioned some of the themes of it seems quite personal, of course. You did with dealing with a parent that had dementia. Of course, you worked in caregiving as well. Like, how was it when it came to the writing process? Was it kind of therapeutic? Oh, sorry, the lecture's kicking in. Was it like did it how was the writing process for you putting together something that's quite personal?
Mm. I mean, it was, it had many stages to it because I'm coming from a background making experimental dance films.
Mm,
So this is the first time that I'm really making narrative cinema. And so in a way I was learning how to write a narrative screenplay while writing Familiar Touch. And
mm,
I start by writing movement. So the earliest draft of the script had very little plot or dialogue. Not that the finished film has that much plot or dialogue anyways. It's not that kind of movie.
yeah.
But the earliest draft was really just imagining Ruth moving around her home of many decades for the last time, and then moving around her home of we don't know how long for the first time, and was sort of just charting her body's movements in these two spaces, and then the physical interactions between her and her caregivers. And I think when I look back on the many years of writing and then making, that kind of embodied language remained the architecture for the film, and it's really how I like to work. And what was great was finding a group of actors who were excited to think about character through embodiment and through gesture.
Yeah.
um, but then, I was writing it bit by bit, night by night, weekend by weekend, while working for other filmmakers and then while working as a caregiver. And so it was sort of this process of like revision over and over and over again.
Mm.
Um, so it's been, um, I guess it was like kind of just like all of these layers on top of
Yeah,
each
step by
other.
step, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. You also mentioned the camera movement. Like while watching it, I was just paying attention to like how certain times the camera will be kind of static, or sometimes the camera will kind of focus on like certain action that's taking place. Can you just expand a little bit more on like your thought process when it came to the camera work and the camera movement with these characters?
Yeah, I mean, so I worked with a great cinematographer named Gabe Elder, and we've been working together for a decade. We made all of our shorts together. And so um, one of the first concepts that we decided upon was that the camera had to be still and patient enough to pick up on the subtle details of Ruth's body.
Mm,
I think when we look at films set in care settings, there's a way in which they're depicted as if there's no life left, that it's a place where people are waiting to die.
mm,
And you see all of these bodies kind of still and slumped over at the edges of the frame. And what we wanted to do was to get close enough and kind of patient enough with the camera that the tiny details of Kathleen's face, of her hands, of her posture, of the gestures of the caregivers would kind of come to life at the scale as if a whole body was dancing, even if they're really tiny.
mm,
So that was an important concept to us, to really kind of feel Ruth's character through her sensation, and to create this idea of a person that's not just their memory, but is all of their senses, and for the viewer to kind of feel that sensation themselves. Um, we also talked about the kind of distance of the camera being like a caregiver. That when you're a caregiver, and I don't know if you've experienced this with loved ones of your own, you kind of you do this dance of calibrating distance where you want to be close enough to observe what's going on with them, but far enough away that you honor their autonomy and dignity, and you're not
mm,
hovering all the time. And so when we thought about kind of how far the camera would be, the idea was that we would kind of move in that kind of range of distances. And so um, that was an important logic for us too. I guess this is a long way of saying Gabe and I really like to create kind of like rules for ourselves that we then break, but we have these kind of logics that we set up before every project. And those were two of the important ones for us.
nice. I think that it kind of just shows your unique style into filmmaking. I thought it was really well done to, because I think everything you've kind of mentioned, like we've kind of seen like care homes, like from the films and TV shows I've seen, always like dark and gloomy, it was nice to see that there's somewhat of a light when they go to that stage of that adulthood, like like you mentioned of coming of age, of like now this is the new chapter of their life. And yes, it can be quite worrying and quite sad, but there's a little happiness in it. And while watching the film, especially at the end, like there's a mixture of like happy and sad, which I think you captured really well. And I think that can't be done without your background within working in a care as a caregiver, which is quite great to see. Um, when it came to making the film and producing it, of course, it took 19 days to film it
Eight-
all.
18 and a half.
18
We're
and a half.
precise. We'll round up 19.
Or was it? I guess like at the end of the film, there was credits giving a shout out to I believe it was one of the care homes. So I reckon you shot at a real care center.
Yeah, we not only shot there, but shot in collaboration with their community.
Yeah.
So after I worked as a caregiver, I trained to become a teaching artist to teach filmmaking to older adults and people with dementia. And that experience made me realize that if we were going to tell a coming of old age story, we should be telling it in collaboration with older adults and caregivers. And so we set up a workshop at Villa Gardens, the retirement community that we filmed in,
Mm,
for their residents to learn filmmaking soup to nuts in the weeks leading up to production. So we met twice a week, and the first session of each week, one of our department heads would teach their craft. And then the second session of that week, the residents would make a short film of their own creation, and they'd
nice.
rotate roles
Yeah.
every week. So if you were the cinematographer one week, you were the sound recordist the next. And then after those 5 weeks, they not only knew our whole crew and some of our cast, but they knew what they were interested in cinematically. And so then everyone signed up for whichever department they wanted to work in. So some residents were supporting characters and background cast, but just as many were in the other departments working on art and camera. And then during those 5 weeks of the workshop, we got to know each department of the care community really well, because a care facility is not unlike a film set in that it's divided by different departments. So there's maintenance, housekeeping, nursing, etc. So those 5 weeks, we were sort of in residence there.
Mm,
Got to understand the kind of precise schedule and components of each department's work. And so we created the schedule around that, rather than around actor availability and light. It was meant to sort of fit into life there, and life
yeah.
and shift schedules as well was an important factor. And then we discovered that much of a handful of the care workers there were film nerds as well, and wanted, had acted in high school and wanted to try again. And so a
Yeah.
lot of their staff ended up in the film too. So it became it was an intergenerational production, but it was also this hybrid model of a scripted film that was also made with this community, both residents and staff alike.
Nice. That's really beautiful to hear, because I guess it goes hand in hand with me, this project, made alongside with them as well, kind of like an ecosystem building within each other, which is it's quite great. Of course, the main film theme of the film is touching. Well, I guess one of the themes of the film is touching on dementia. I feel like when I was watching it, I don't know if the actual word dementia was actually mentioned in it. Was that like a conscious decision not to use the word, or just yeah? Can you just explain why the word wasn't mentioned in the film?
Yeah. Um, Thanks for picking up on that.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I I wanted us to experience Ruth's dementia through her experience of it. And
Mm,
what I noticed with my clients when I was a caregiver was that they didn't experience their day-to-day life as symptoms of a disease. They were experiencing themselves and the world around them as sort of, fluid, continuous experience.
mm,
And so I wanted to stay away from kind of framing Ruth's self and life through a medical diagnosis. Um,
yeah.
and it's something I've also just noticed on a personal level, that when a loved one has dementia or memory loss, like sometimes we tiptoe around them.
Yeah.
Uh, and so I wanted, but the most important factor was wanting to experience Ruth as she does, and she is Ruth, not a woman with dementia. And so that's why it's never mentioned in the film.
Oh, nice. So, yeah, I love that because I was watching. I was like, okay, because I guess the film does a good job of like letting you know what the issue is without actually saying the word. So much so that I was like, I don't need to hear the word. So it's always great to just hear, understand your process of why it wasn't used, and I think that was a great way to do it. Um, Before watching this film, like dementia is like one of my worst fears of like having like I've been watching a TV show. I think it's called This Is Us, and I think one of the characters had dementia. And I kind of build like the paranoia of it. So it was nice to see a film like this that touches on it. Of course, has a nice balance between the sad and the happiness of what it can be and how it looks like, and it's nice to see it from Ruth's point of view as well. Um, yeah, thank you so much for joining us on the Outtake show. Just give a breakdown on your film, Familiar Touch. Is in cinemas right now for everyone to go watch. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Junior. It's been a pleasure.